What is up, everybody? This is Duncan Palamourdas, and I'm joined today by Peter Bemingham, and we have another episode of Philosophical Friday. As you can tell, the setup today is a little bit different. Brad Wilson is not with us because he is busy with some very important parent duties, and as Christmas and holidays are on the way. So we're trying to fill in for him and Peter. Welcome, and really happy to have you here. Join us to the podcast and to talk some pretty interesting things. How are you today?
Very good. Great to be here. Thanks very much, Duncan, for that introduction. Yeah, as Duncan said, I'm filling in for Brad today. He's busy. For anyone, obviously, nobody's gonna know me, or at least most people won't. I've been a student of Brad and a member of Greatness Village for the past 2.5 years. And yeah, so
that's
pretty
awesome.
Excited to delve into today's topic.
And what is today's topic? I'm gonna ask the question that Brad always asks me. What is today's topic, Peter?
So today's topic is artificial intelligence, and we're gonna see how that relates to poker and some of the concerns and some of the developments and some of the good things that can come from it.
Absolutely. And we were having a little bit of a conversation before the podcast started, and you told me that in research for today's episode, you went into the good old rabbit hole, getting into some of the stuff, and there's a lot of stuff going on. Just for the listener, just a brief update. About half a year ago, there was a gentleman, an engineer working at Google. His name is Blake Lemoine, who came out and talked about sentience in AI. We're going to talk a little bit about this. Just recently, like a couple of days ago, there was a huge update on ChatGPT, which is a form of AI that can actually write essays in a very believable way. So people talking about it all the time. So Peter, what are some things that you saw in that rabbit hole? Let's start there. Some things that drew your attention, piqued your interest. What are some things that you saw there?
Well, I think kind of straight away, like first off, I looked into just briefly kind of the history of AI and its kind of beginnings, where it started like back in the 50s when the idea was first sort of mooted. Alan Turing and talking about it, machines developing and stuff like that. Then I kind of got drawn towards the to looking into the machines that have developed to beat human players at chess,
right,
at Go,
Deep Blue,
at poker. And this is from the Deep Blue to the Deep Stack,
right,
coming in, Pluribus, and now more recently AlphaGo from Google. And just sort of looking through just how it's developed over time has been astounding. Like it was pretty interesting. I was reading about Libertas, I think it's called, which was one of the first or at least the second AI to be able to beat players at heads up, no limit hold'em.
Right.
And there was actually an interesting article around that, written in 2017 by someone in the Denver Post, I think it was, or one of the Denver papers, and it was discussing the fact that this machine was out there now and it was able to beat players at heads up, but don't worry, being able to beat more than 2 players, like 5, 6 players,
still far
that's
away.
a long way off. Like you don't have to worry about that. 2 years later, Pluribus is beating 6 of the best.
Right.
It's
right.
So
it is very interesting that you bring in that point. I mean, you made a lot of points there. I mean, you made the point about history. You made the point about the fact that we have seen several games being beaten, from the Deep Blue to in chess. Then we have the AlphaGo that actually also does chess, but was able to beat Go players. You're talking about Liberatus. I actually wrote about Liberatus in my book. It's something that over Carnegie Mellon, it was an incredible advancement. But the other point that you made, which is very, very interesting, is the idea that we are trying to measure sometimes the speed of progress, and humans are really, really bad at understanding the speed of progress, right? So especially when it comes to computation, which is something that I'm hoping to delve into a little bit later, what is and what isn't AI. But this is something that we can be very bad at. For example, there's a famous example in physics. I believe it was around 1900, where people thought, you know what, pretty much everything that is to be discovered in physics, it has been already, more or less, right? That was in 1900, right? And like 20 years later, like, first of all, 5 years later, we have special relativity. So that time is relative, essentially, right? I mean, time is not the same for all observers. Like, everything that is to be discovered has been discovered, and all of a sudden we say, wait, time maybe not be absolute, just a little maybe here. Then we have general relativity. Everything we thought about gravity being a force is absolutely incorrect. Gravity is not a pull. Gravity is like some sort of a distortion of space, and then things are sliding there. They're not being pulled, they're just sliding, sort of even light itself. So, and then we have quantum mechanics. Up at this point, we thought that probability was just a proxy, like we do in poker, oh, the chance of a king coming on the river, let's say a 2-outer, is around, like, from the turn to the river, is about whatever, 5%. So it's not really the 5%, it's just a proxy to reality, because we try to, if you will, we try to approximate our uncertainty and our confusion of how the deck has been shuffled. There's not really randomness in poker. It's just we put randomness to compensate for our ignorance. And then quantum mechanics comes and tells you, well, maybe randomness is innate to our way of thinking and things. So that happens a lot. Like, humans, we're terrible in predicting. So it's really funny that you mentioned that, the fact that we have issues with the speed of progress. And what were some things you saw? Let's break that down, like those 3 things, which I think they're very interesting. What are some things in history you saw that caught your attention? Like, what would be a historical tidbit? It could be related to when this thing started. It could be related to anything at all. What was there something historical that you saw there that was like, wow, that is really fascinating? It's what comes to your mind in terms of history?
I suppose one of the most interesting things that to consider is when some of the earlier iterations of AI, the actual level of computing power that was required. Like, right. I mean, we're talking, like massive, servers, a lot of power was required to actually carry out the functions. And then you move forward in time to Pluribus, which was basically designed on what could be considered a home computer. No bigger than a home computer, and running off very relatively small power. So that's a massive leap forward. Like, absolutely. I mean, that's huge. Absolutely. The fact that we've now, like, I mean, obviously we're used to, computers get smaller, technology has grown smaller over time. But just the sheer functionality of, something to be able to go onto the computer compared to, an iteration from even 15 years ago, 20 absolutely. Years ago. Like, I mean, it's light years in the difference.
Absolutely. And let me, if you don't mind, let me just say something on that, right? Because this is incredible what you're saying. You're absolutely correct. So you're making a very important observation there. You're saying, on the one hand, there are technological improvements that actually allow for the same power to be performed at a smaller scale, right? So that is basically the efficiency of technology, which you're absolutely correct. And this is something that, you know, companies like semiconductors and companies that actually create those chips are responsible for. On the other hand, we have the machine learning aspect of it, right? Which is essentially the computer science, which is people come up with better and better algorithms. So, you know, there are ways, to find, you know, what you're looking for. Like to give you like a classic example, because this is stuff that, you know, they really fascinate me. If someone, let's say, here's an example of what I mean by a better algorithm that hopefully, you know, for the listener, for the uninitiated, we don't necessarily want to get technical here. So let's say that you and I, Peter, we play a game, right? We play a game and I'm thinking of a number. To keep it simple, let's say that that number is somewhere between 1 and 100, right? And then you try to guess that number, but of course you need a little bit of help, right? So you can ask me questions, you know, is the number, you know, you can say, is the number 17, you know, is the number 18? So you can, obviously one strategy would be, is the number 1? Is the number you're thinking 2? Is the number you're thinking 3? But if you're allowed to ask yes or no questions, you know, there's something better you can do. Perhaps, you know, you can guess what that is. Like, what would you do? How would you try to find, you know, my number if you're allowed to ask yes or no questions? Like if we were to play like that.
Like, I mean, obviously, if it's between 1 and 100, very first question, is your number below 50?
Exactly. And this turns out to be one of the optimal ways to start the game. Exactly, because
straight away you have the field, so you have the permutation in play.
Exactly right. So you have, like, you narrow down your field to exactly half. Now, someone may say, well, maybe you know Duncan a little bit, and maybe you know that Duncan, you know, he likes specific numbers a little bit more than others, and that can be factored in. And indeed, you know, when AI get that information, they will factor it in. But all else being equal, having no other information, the best way would be to narrow down to half, and then you start with 50. Whether we get to the upper half or the lower half, then we get to the 50-50 of that. And before you know it, you can actually get that number with 10 guesses, roughly speaking, right? Because excuse me, I said 100, not 1,000, not guesses. You can get, we can get the number down with 7 guesses, like, because 2 to the 7 is 128. So it's logarithmic. This is called a very efficient algorithm. It's a very efficient algorithm that can actually, you know, find results much faster. And there is a huge progress in computer science. So there's both progress in terms of technology, people find better ways of doing things, and in terms of algorithms. What was something that fascinated you in terms of specific game-related results, whether it was, you know, chess, whether it was Go? People have made progresses also in backgammon. They've solved checkers using computer science. Obviously, poker, a lot of stuff in poker. Maybe you can share some of those tidbits for us there. What happened there?
I think the most striking thing to me that stood out, and this was specifically related to poker, and also especially with the Go, when the AlphaGo beat the Go champion,
right,
was the strategies used by the AI are not strategies typically seen from human players.
Right.
These, like, I saw one comment in particular about the Go match, and nobody in thousands of years of this game has taken this line. This was just never thought of. Or never done for whatever reason. Now, Go is a very complicated game, and I have no understanding of it. But like, from even looking at it on a, you know, sort of prima facie, I could see, yeah, okay, that's incredible. Like, that they found something that nobody else had done, or that we know of.
Absolutely. And you, this is an incredible observation. By the way, for anybody who wants to watch this, there's an amazing documentary on AlphaGo. You can find it on YouTube. It's incredible, like the whole journey, the engineering team, the Korean world champion. Very, very, very beautiful. You can find it on YouTube for free. But you're making a very good point that indeed the AI did find paths that humans were not able to do, right? And this is for many reasons. First of all, these games are so complex. Almost by definition, there's going to be areas that haven't been explored by humans, whether by accident or for other reasons that we don't understand. Like, I mean, the games are so incredibly complex. And I remember Garry Kasparov in particular around 1997, when he was playing against Deep Blue, IBM's first serious attempt first serious successful attempt to beat the chess champion in chess. I remember Garry Kasparov, the then world champion, saying, I really tried to choose moves that will restrict the possibilities for my opponent, because I knew that if it comes down to computability, I'm going to be destroyed. So I wanted to limit down the paths. I wanted essentially, so for poker players, that would be the equivalent of like cutting out huge branches of the tree. So you don't want your opponent to go to complicated branches of your tree if your opponent can actually be very, very calculation heavy. And I just thought it was fascinating. Another example, there is a beautiful example from Libratis, depending on how you want to pronounce it.
Yeah.
When he was, you mentioned earlier, right? He beat some of the best heads-up players, like 4 players, right? And I remember Doug Polk was coaching them back in the day. It was a thing. And I actually wrote an article about how the AI at some point went crazy with 5-3 suited. So it was incredible. Like, so the action went something like this. They were playing heads up, button raises, right? I believe they had something like King Jack suited, King Queen suited. I forget the exact hand. Libratis on the big blind, 3 bets with 5-3 suited. Incidentally, they're like crazy deep. We're talking about, I don't even remember, 500 big blinds deep, 1,000 big blinds, like crazy deep, right? So 3 bets with 5-3 suited. Okay, that's fine. Button 4 bets, right? And Libratis decides to flat the 4 bet out of position with 5-3 suited, right?
Wow.
This is exactly.
That's confidence in ability.
That's confidence in ability. That's exactly right. So the way, like I, as a viewer, like to see this is that basically Libratis is trying to be what we would call super balanced. He can literally show up with anything under any circumstances, right? This is how showing up with anything under any circumstances looks like when it's sort of like very nicely polished, right? Because humans, we would be terrible at trying to do that, right? We would probably overplay or underplay certain hands. And I thought I was fascinated by this. So to make matters worse, by the way, the AI flops bottom pair, and he like gets all the money in against the flush. So like goes crazy, goes batshit insane. And I'm like, holy smokes, that happened. That was like, it was incredible. It was incredible. I don't know, have you seen that hand? Have you like maybe?
No, I haven't seen that hand, but like, I mean, that kind of rings true for a lot of what I was, looking into. Like I saw one particular comment, and it was like the AI, because you've removed the human element, the emotion, it's all about winning. If there's a 10% chance the AI can win versus a 90% chance they're going to lose, they're going to take that 10% chance if it makes sense in their calculations. The human's not going to find that. Emotion is going to stop them in a lot of cases.
Very good. And this is actually excellent. Like, they're going to take those winning chances however they can, which actually now brings the question, what exactly is artificial intelligence, right? What does it try? What does it try to do? And maybe you can try and take that part, what is artificial intelligence? And maybe I can try the other part, what isn't artificial intelligence, because there's a lot of miscomprehension there.
Yeah, I suppose to me, artificial intelligence is the ability for the program to adapt and learn and build upon itself and review its past performance and get better as a result. Like, I mean, let's sort of bringing it back to poker in particular,
Mm-hmm.
to sort of, it will review its calculations from the day's play, make adjustments if necessary, and play better the next day. So it has learned and it has improved the same way you would hope a human player would if they were following the same path. So that, to me, sort of a very basic meaning of artificial intelligence is just the ability to adapt itself, to learn, and to develop and become more efficient at whatever its particular task is, whatever the functionality of it is.
That is an excellent definition. And it goes down exactly to that idea, the idea of basically learning, which comes from machine learning, the idea of adaptability, the idea of basically analyzing data and finding what I would call, or mathematicians would call, correlations. Like the AI is incredibly good at finding correlations. To the other side of things, right? Because again, AI was in the news. Is AI sentient? Is AI what? Are the Terminator days near us? What exactly is happening? Like, should we go and take cover? There is one very important limitation of AI that people typically don't talk about, and that limitation is that AI is correlational. It's not causation. It's not causal, and it's also not contextual. In other words, what I mean is that the way the AI works literally tries to identify patterns from a huge database, and they're awesome at doing that, right? So one example, why ChatGPT, for example, was so successful in writing essays. Because there's a huge amount of them. So that's number one. They need a big sample to look from. And second of all, they're vague enough so that the AI can actually have a decent margin of error. So the margin of error is also very important. So if you change a word to another word, then the other person will still get the meaning. So it's not necessarily incorrect. Now you compare that, for example, to original scientific work, which is first highly unique, so they don't have the data to do that. And also, there's not room for margin of error. You change one digit in your entire calculation on something, and all of a sudden it's incorrect, right? So that's why this is one thing that AI is not good at. And indeed, Stack Exchange banned ChatGPT. For those of you who don't know, Stack Exchange is a place where you ask scientific questions and get scientific answers, as accurate as possible, of course. Part of the reason why it's not there necessarily is because they're really good, correlationally speaking, they're really good at identifying patterns. They're not good at creating original thought. And I want to underline that. For all of our progress all of these years, AI are still glorified imitators. They're not original thinkers, right? This is very, very important. And of course, I'm happy to have that conversation, a little bit further. I don't know, what are your thoughts about, have you found in your rabbit hole any original thinking from AI? What are your thoughts, Peter?
No, not really. And that kind of what you're saying, makes a lot of sense. And even when you look at the applications that it's used in, where AI might be used in trading programs and stuff like that for the stock markets, which is all about patterns. That's what traders were doing for years before they had any sort of computer algorithms helping them. And that's what it and then for database searching, medical stuff, crawling through legal database, any of these applications for it, that would make a lot of sense. But it's not going to, based on what you're saying, and it makes a lot of sense. The AI is not going to sit there and come up with a complex legal argument for you,
right? Based
on something original. They're not going to have that. They're not going to be able to have that creative aspect,
right?
Which would make a lot of sense.
And you're making a good point. They're not going to be able to do that with let's say, a complex legal argument, unless they're trying to imitate somebody else's legal argument that they have seen before.
Yes, of course. If it's a regurgitation process, if it's merely citing case law or something like that, well, yeah, AI is going to be nailing it. Like, but yeah.
Exactly. I remember I had a friend of mine who used to argue that, Duncan, what if we had somebody who knew all the information out there on the internet, right? I mean, somebody who knows every little bit that's out there in Google. Isn't that, like the smartest human being? Yes, it would be the smartest being, not human being. It would be the smartest being. But the question is, would this being be able to progress by itself? Knowing, like, would be, because the thing is that there was, like, AI today, for example, can produce music, right? How about that? And music that we've never heard before. But the question is, can the AI produce new music genres? Can it create something from things they haven't seen before? And the way computational calculations, the way computability works, one needs to see patterns to learn from. So without those patterns, it's impossible to learn from. And just to paraphrase Roger Penrose, one of his conjectures is that consciousness is not computable. It doesn't necessarily come down to computability. So one big question, I guess, for AI is how much of our being comes down to computability? Because this is an open question. Perhaps everything there is about us comes down to computation. Like, once maybe we understand a few factors of the neurons or the DNA or everything, perhaps we can extract information. And if it comes down to computability, then AI may be able to crack it. But the way I like to put it personally, and that's a conjecture, AI will never come anywhere close to being either contextual, causal, sentient, however you're going to call it, unless we themselves know how to create life out of thin air. Right? So because we will need to unlock the question of what is life? Like, how do we get into creating life out of organic material? If we understand this, then we understand the computation of it. If it's computational, then yes, the computers can learn that too. But unless we sort of like unlock that, I think there is a gap there that cannot be bridged. So we can have up to bionic, if you will, bionic robots, but not pure, metal robots that can, supersede humans.
And to be fair, like, even from the science fiction realm, like, what you're saying, is on point, because
right.
Even in science fiction, anytime there's been sort of AI that's been, fully sentient and able to, feel it, even if it wasn't feeling emotion, but even to think creatively on its own, it's always had an organic component.
Right.
It's always had some sort of organic component.
Right.
No matter what film or what series it was, there's always been that element to it. So obviously, somewhere along the line, when they were, coming up with these ideas for shows, somebody decided, well, we have to have some element of realism. And, if you haven't got a living some sort of living organism within the system, it's not going to be able to do this.
Very good, Peter. And is this so people? Yeah. So the bottom line is, don't be afraid of the Terminator. Be afraid of the Edge Runners, Cyberpunk. I don't know if we have any gamers in the audience. So half human, half robot. And this is actually an excellent segue. Because ethical concerns are really in the back head of people. And we were talking a little bit earlier, and you mentioned that part of the things on your research were ethical concerns. What are some ethical concerns people are having? What are some of your personal concerns?
Well, I think, like, sort of as a sort of a more general overview, one of the bigger concerns around AI is oversight.
Mm-hmm.
The level of autonomy as sort of people see more and more function in various areas to sort of AI, the level of autonomy seems to go down. Like, people are not, the actual oversight of it seems to go down. And that's maybe, that's maybe an area that needs to be checked. And regulations, what, like, I mean, look, we all know governments are very slow to act. It's like, you know, it's like turning battleships trying to get them to do anything, but they are light years behind. Like, they're only just catching up to internet stuff.
Right.
Like, I mean, regulations surrounding the use of AI and, you know, how it can be developed and stuff. That's an even bigger area. Like, I mean, that's a potential minefield, depending on how far the technology is going to go. And if they don't get out in front of it, there could be some very serious ethical questions down the line.
And you're absolutely, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. That was just, you know, that was sort of the general overview. Like, from a more myopic viewpoint, say from the poker standpoint, obviously, you know, a bot that can, you know, beat humans for a significant big blinds for hundreds over a large sample, it's a real threat. Like, I mean, it's a real threat, especially when we know that it can be done on, you know, a small scale, that it doesn't take masses of computing power or massive servers, that this can be, you know, all you need is the know-how, all you need is the ability to program it. And so that is a concern.
Absolutely.
How big a concern it needs to be, that's a bigger question. You know, like, I mean, this is not something that everybody can, you know, create. It does take a lot of time, and how many iterations of these things are out there? Like, is there something close to Pluribus deployed as we speak in the online streets?
Right. No, this
very
is
hard to track.
Very hard to track indeed. And let me just say, this is not myopic at all. Like, what you're describing right now, regulation, is a really big issue. And Brad and I, we often talk about regulation in other aspects as well. And we're worried that certain areas might not be regulated properly. That doesn't mean not regulated enough, but properly is certainly the word that we're trying to understand. Right? Because I know a lot of poker players think, you know, maybe we don't need more regulation, we need less regulation. Whether it's more or less, what we need is good regulation, right? Whatever that may be. But
and that's always the key, is good regulation.
Right. Exactly. And actually, to your point, that concern, because I wanted to be fair, I mentioned Blake Lemoine earlier, or I guess Lemoine would be the English pronunciation. But part of he did an interview, and people asked him, like, do you really fear that the AI is sentient? And he said, not really. This was a way for me to raise awareness. I'm paraphrasing, of course, raise awareness to the ethical considerations. And just, even if we're right about this speculation, if you will, even if we're right about the postulate that, you know, we're not threatened by a Terminator, we're threatened by an edge runner, so to speak, you know, a bionic being, that's still a huge threat, right? I mean, even if, you know, the AI at its current state, even if it's not sentient, they can still perform a lot of things that can be dangerous, like go to an automated factory, take a self-driving car, which, by the way, disclaimer, I'm invested in companies that make self-driving cars, so I'm actually not Tesla. So NVIDIA, for anybody who's interested. But the still, you know, and I believe in that technology, but still there's so many things we don't understand. So there are potential dangers there. If we get it wrong, self-driving cars, they don't need to be sentient to cause a lot of accidents. And I'm not saying that, you know, the rate of accidents in self-driving cars is high, but these are real concerns, a priori concerns, like real concerns. What are some positive things that you think AI can actually help us with in the future?
I suppose, like, general efficiency at, you know, performing tasks, like, that's at a basic level. Like, if we consider, again, we'll consider, you know, poker and how it's played. You know, if we watch say Pluribus playing, and what, you know, how that system tackles various opponents, and, you know, using various bet sizes, we can learn. And that's where we can learn from it, in real time, by, you know, playing against it. This is a thinking, you know, it's calculating it's a calculating system. Whereas, like, I mean, people are you're training on something like IO. It's all based on inputs, and it's inputs that you've made or somebody's made for you, but it's limited. Whereas if you're playing against a genuine AI or training with or learning from, there are no limits. Like, it's whatever they have calculated in that moment. And that's what we do. Like, I mean, that's basically what the best human players do, is they make adjustments on the fly. And
absolutely, what you're referring to, like, essentially neural nets, that's how they that's how they work, right? I mean, essentially they are live, so to speak, right? They never stop learning. Any new experience becomes a new data point, so they keep playing against each other, and then they incorporate all that that element into it. But what sounds to me like a very interesting observation, again, that you made, Peter, is that essentially we teach, and I'm using the royal we, of course, we teach a software like Pio, for example. We teach how to calculate things, and then it teaches us some opportunities that we can look for specific inputs, right? So there is a little bit of a back and forth. So
it's a give and take procedure. Yeah,
it's a give and take procedure, right? I mean, we're using the human creativity, originality to come up with these ideas, and then they use the sheer computability and correlational power, right? I mean, the power to see patterns better than anybody, existing patterns. That's the interesting caveat here. And then we learn about patterns that, our limited cognitive capacities haven't allowed us, to see. We look at directions that we may honestly may not have the time to look at, and that's exciting. Like that computability is exciting. Are you excited about automation at all? Are you excited about the idea of automation?
I like automation. I think automation is a good thing in general. I think it makes us more efficient as a society. In general, long term, it will keep costs down for any number of sectors. And like, there are plenty of sectors where costs spiral out of control, like the health sector, for one, especially like you living in the States. And if there's any way that AI can sort of reduce those costs down long term, that's a huge social benefit. I do like automation. I do have, look, there's obvious concerns around, automation means, less jobs for people in those particular sectors. But I think the challenge in that is going forward as a society is to find better ways of using people.
Exactly.
There's different uses for people. We don't all have to be slaving away 9 to 5. There are other applications for us if computers can do these other jobs better. Like, I mean, our opportunities are limitless, because there are so many things that AI will never be able to do and never be able to perform. Like, an AI is never going to be able to cook a 3-star Michelin course meal for a person. That's just not going to happen.
Exactly.
And that's just one random example.
A random example. And also, I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's one of the things actually I'm not concerned about. I have other concerns, maybe we can talk, but that's not one of them. And the reason is people are forgetting a lot of factors. Number one is exactly what you just talked about. There are specific things that AI cannot necessarily replace humans. You're absolutely correct about that. And we talked about one of these things. Cooking is a perfect example, but then there is other things like, that involve creativity, original thinking, and things like that. The other aspect that people forget is that, and you mentioned it, you can use this workforce elsewhere. And not just you can use the workforce elsewhere, but the fact that now we create a system that has a lot of automation creates new jobs. Someone has to control, in some sense, that automation. What I mean by that is someone has to perhaps deploy that automation. Somebody has to make sure that that automation needs its batteries replaced, so to speak, right? Yeah. So there are going to be different aspects. And obviously, I'm oversimplifying here, but the point is we can use those people to spread that automation properly, efficiently, reducing error, human error, doing the repairs and all of these things. And at the same time, like, it's not like, the way I like to put it is, you said we don't want to, this is going to resonate with all the poker players, we don't want to slave from 9 to 5. That's, I think a lot of people have that in common, but it's not like, I don't think any of, us poker players, especially the listener who takes time out of like their precious day to listen to a podcast like this or other podcasts, it's not like, oh, instead I just want to stare at this white wall the whole time from 9 to 5 because I'm lazy. No, we want to use our energy to something more productive, more creative, more original perhaps, or something else in general, even if we don't want it to be productive. So I think that there is a huge possibility, huge potential for people to, and of course I'm talking about non-lazy people, clearly, but which is, I think, the majority, honestly, of the people. I think the majority of people are good people. The majority of people are not lazy people. So to use them in proper, whatever the proper will be in the new norm, in a proper, in more proper environments. So is that sort of like the vision that, how would you calibrate that vision? What is in your vision of like, how would automation look like? Because I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, that's that's pretty much what I was driving at, is that, yeah, like, I mean, yes, we need it. Automation makes things more efficient. There will always, as you say, like, I mean, at the end of the day, AI is a machine and will always need to be serviced and upgraded and developed further. And there's always going to be room for the human component. And then it's just putting those extra resources that you've now made available to better use elsewhere in society. Like, I mean, we constantly talk about, there's a lack of people in this. We don't have enough of a workforce here. We don't have enough of a workforce in this sector. But it's about managing resources. It's not about, it's not about the resources not being there. It's just about managing them, and that's the challenge moving forward with regards to automation. I think is where you freed those resources, how to educate people to move to different sectors. And there's the possibilities are endless, and automation can make so many more things possible, as well.
Absolutely, and I do think it's an important thing. One of my favorite quotes from Jensen Huang, happens to be the CEO of NVIDIA. And again, a disclaimer, I'm an investor, but one of the things that I really like about his vision is that his goal is to work on the automation of automation. He wants to basically like automate things that automate things, right? Because again, I mean, it's a semiconductor company. They're all about computation and, GPUs and all about calculation. And to me, regardless of specifics, this is a direction that can be incredibly helpful, because AI is all about computation. It's all about correlation. It's all about this type of, this type of things. And how about poker, right? What are, some things that, and you mentioned it already, like you mentioned how we can take advantage of what we have available, like how we can learn from Pi, or how we can learn from those devices and artificial intelligence. What are some things you perhaps hope we can get in the future? What are some concerns you may have? Let's start with the hope, and then we can get to the concerns. What are some things you want to see from AI moving forward as it pertains to poker, and how would you use it, to improve your own game?
I suppose, like, to see, like, I mean, a lot of the training products that are on, that are on the market, they're pretty much, like, I mean, anything like Pi, anything that's sort of, GTO based, like Pio or GTO, which is all the whole plethora of, they're all running solves. They're all coming off the same. Somebody has sat there and put those solves in. What I would like to see is an actual artificial intelligence trainer that is gonna play against you, that is gonna adapt to you, that can take your hands, look at them, give you options, based on, whatever computations you can make. Then maybe this, you could have done this here, or you could have done that here. And it's based more around reality. And
I like it.
Like, that will factor in then it will bring in, like, there would be a lot of elements of MDA in there as well.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's going to collect that data, and
Sure.
it's going to use that data, and it's going to use that to exploit
Sure.
the pool as well. So I think that's probably, you know, the hope, that you would have something like that. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know.
Yeah. And that, you see, it's nice that you say that, right? Because it's a complicated issue, and we're not here to give answers. We're here to explore and think about it. And actually, you gave me an idea. Like, I mean, you said playing against you, and that's beautiful. And also potentially play with you, right? I mean, sort of like get in your shoes somehow and say, listen, I know, Peter, you see all that data, but perhaps I see the data a little bit differently. Because of my, you know, sort of like computational skills, says the AI, not in as essential. You understand what I'm saying? I'm metaphorically speaking.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Do these calculations, and perhaps this is what I would do in your shoes, given your play style. You know, like this is a beautiful thing. I've never thought of that. It's an excellent way to take advantage of the dynamic part of the AI that you alluded to earlier, right? I mean, because Pio is static, right? Somebody programmed it. It's like takes input, gives output, right? It's basically a function. You feed it, you know, you feed it pigs and you get out sausages. Not the prettiest image, but that's sort of the idea.
But that's the reality. Yeah,
that's the reality, right? But then you can have something which is more, you know, a dynamic and more suited to your needs, and that is incredible. And this is actually, funny enough, something that doesn't get limited or restricted from the correlation does not imply causation problem, right? Because the AI does not need to be causal, does not need to understand life to help you. All it needs to do is understand patterns, correlations, and your partners, your patterns in particular, right? Which is something that exists out there. So as long as the AI is correlational, which it can be, it can help you. And this is an incredible, I've never thought about it. This is a beautiful, beautiful hope for the future.
And it doesn't matter what way players adapt, because at the end of the day, all that means is the patterns change. And all it needs is, you know, a sample size, whatever sample size that is, to start seeing what the new patterns are and to adjust based on that. So it will constantly evolve. You know, off that, rather than this, you know, mind numbing, everybody's trying to break it down to know an exact frequency of, you know, like, I mean, that's boring.
That's boring.
Whereas, you know, that does not excite me whatsoever, poring over, you know, charts for hours. But the thoughts of being able to play against or play with and learn from something that's actually, you know, thinking on the fly and, you know, putting itself in your, that's exciting. That's interesting.
That is very
something
exciting.
I would like to be a part of.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's exactly. Maybe we can call it a Pio Peter, you know, so it's going to be. I love it.
We may have to get the patent, the copyright out there now, Duncan. I can see the masses running to their computers to start programming.
That's exactly right. But, you know, until then, I'm going to be using this. So, you know, for future reference, you know, I'm going to call it the Pio Peter. I really love that idea. It's really, 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 really cool idea. And I mean, not to be party poopers or downers or anything like that, but we're realists, right? So what are some things that we legitimately, as poker players, are worried about? And we should, you know, you already mentioned, of course, the ethical considerations of, you know, data mining. And this is a topic, you know, in and of itself. Yes, I mean, it's crazy topic to talk about, and we're thinking of exploring it at some point. But what are some just concerns that we have as poker players? What are some things, and also for the listener, potentially, you know, as we get into that era, to protect themselves?
Yeah, like, I mean, I suppose, like, I mean, obviously, like, first and foremost, like, I mean, if you're playing online, like, having watched, and I actually sat and I watched through some of the hands that Pluribus played, just to kind of get a feel for what was, because I hadn't actually watched any of the stuff. And for all intents and purposes, you would think you were playing against some sort of, you know, maniac recreational with all the different sizes and everything that was happening. And it was like, if I did not know that I was watching, you know, sort of a winning strategy, I would have thought I want to sit to this player's immediate left, because this guy's nuts. Like, I mean, some of the stuff he's doing is crazy. But you, to be actually able to detect anything in its patterns of play would be extremely difficult.
Right.
So you're relying now on companies like PokerStars or GG developing their own security AI to be able to detect the actual, you know, the actual program in the system in some way. And that's a whole different set of challenges with the availability. Like, I mean, it doesn't, like, I mean, an AI does not even have to be hosted on the computer that somebody's playing on. It could be screen scraping and, you know, printing out results beside somebody. It's like, I mean, we know this happens with, you know, people using sort of dream machines and stuff like that. So that technology's there. That happens. That's part of the game. So I think when you're playing against something like, if you're playing against something like that and that's deployed on any sort, if that was deployed in any sort of scale, I think that could be the actual death knell of online poker for cash games. And I think that's important. I think tournaments are a different beast, simply because of the varying stack sizes. All the different, I think that may be a little different. We know that's different for solvers. We know that kind of, it's harder it's much harder with tournaments. But cash games where you're playing at that kind of steady 100 big blinds constantly, it's that could actually, if something like that was deployed on a mass scale, I think that could really be, I know like the harbingers have been saying it for years of online poker, but that could be the end. That could be, you know, the death knell.
You're absolutely right, and you bring a lot of good points. One just side point that I want to make: you're absolutely right about, like, you know, 100 big blinds versus like really short stacks in the tournament setting. One thing that I would add, if we talk about like deeper poker, like to the point where we're reaching like the 1,000 big blinds, that's the point where potentially the cash game could outweigh in terms of complexity a tournament. Like, you know, like it can get more complicated. But of course, you're talking about, you know, the day-to-day sort of like what you would see on a cash game on, like, let's say PokerStars, or like in a place like places like this, where most people, for the most part, they're playing 100 big blinds effective. And you're absolutely correct. Yes, and they're getting, just in case for the listener who may not be aware of that nuance, which it's clearly you are. But you bring in two very important points that I want to really talk about. The first one is, you mentioned earlier, and this is very, very true. You know, a player that looks like a maniac to us, right? I mean, we perceive it as a maniac, and they may be playing an optimal strategy. And this comes back to the idea of imitation, the high correlation that, you know, the AI has actually identified for itself. I mean, they're not doing it consciously, but they create that imitation, perhaps not to fool us or anything like that, but they're finding those patterns, and those patterns can actually create a very fooling image for us. And this is similar to somebody creating a fake scientific paper. If you are not an expert, the AI will fool you every time, will fool everybody, right? So it's the same idea. But I just wanted to touch a little bit on that. But the other point, which is extremely important that you mentioned, is that perhaps one way we can fight the disadvantages of artificial intelligence and the downsides is perhaps with more AI, right? I mean, the idea that security can use its own AI, and that's another very interesting idea. And we have seen over the years, for example, people used to be afraid of hackers. We still are afraid of hackers. And, you know, now we have things called like antiviruses. Now we have things like, you know, counterintelligence. Casinos used to be afraid of, you know, card counters until they actually hired card counters to work behind the eye in the sky and, you know, just ruin it for all of us traders. So the joke, of course, is that there are, you know, for every bad guy who uses technology for nefarious purposes, hopefully there's two good guys, you know, who, you know, can use technology for better purposes. And But I just wanted to say, just in closing, that for me, the concept of imitation is personally my biggest concern. That's what I'm most concerned about, because AI is an excellent imitator. It's such an excellent imitator that, people can start like, those robocalls, like at some point,
Yeah.
they're not going to feel like robocalls. Why? Because again, there's so much data of real humans talking. AI has improved tremendously on the way they're using speech patterns. So anything that can be imitated, that is the real, for me, concern, right? I mean, things, and you alluded to earlier. Wow. I mean, we went through a huge, ray of things. So do you have any final thoughts, any things that you saw or you wanted to address, like as we're talking today?
Or it's definitely a subject that I want to do, because this, like, I mean, it was something that it's popped up recently again, and like, I mean, it's always something that's been around in the background. It has been for years, and again, it's popped up recently on Twitter now with chat GPT, and,
right.
People trying to say that's kind of brought AI back to the sort of into the forward consciousness, and but it's definitely a subject that I want to delve a bit deeper into, and just to see the possibilities. Like, I mean, what can be achieved, and
right.
what can't be achieved, and where it's going. Like, I mean, what direction are they actually looking to take it? It's been I have to say, like, I mean, when you dropped it on me saying this as a possible topic, I was like,
right.
Okay, let's have a little look. And all of a sudden, then I was down the AI rabbit hole, and yeah,
yes.
it's certainly made for an interesting 24 hours, Duncan, this topic.
Yeah. It is fascinating. It is fascinating, and I gotta say, Peter, I don't know for the listener, but I gotta say, I mean, you've done your homework, Peter. Like, it was an excellent conversation. No, I mean, you didn't just like go down the rabbit hole. I mean, you kept notes. I mean, you're like very on point. I mean, you did your research. It's excellent. I mean, I really enjoyed the conversation. And for the listener, drop some love. Go to greatest village and drop some love for Peter. Give us some shout out. I mean, I think he was amazing. So
I'm there daily. I'm readily accessible in Greatness Village. If anyone wants to discuss AI or other poker topics, I'm always available.
Absolutely. And what are some places where people can find you? Maybe your Twitter, if you have Twitter, or like any other social media you're currently on?
Well, Greatness Village is the best place to find me.
Excellent.
I'm on Twitter, just Peter Bemingham. You'll find me. I'm there. probably following a lot of poker players. So if you I'm easily findable in that respect.
Beautiful. So there you have it, folks. You can find Peter on the village. This is the best place, but also at Peter Bemingham on the Twitters of the world. You can also find Brad at CPG Podcast, and you can find myself at Ask the Math DR. Why Alex Beats Bobby, if you want to see our beautiful faces in video form, and rocking for me this terrible video quality. I'll improve there. Professional podcasters here, Peter. We'll get there eventually. So, but once again,
we will throw in the old, if you've enjoyed this, hit like, hit subscribe. It helps out the channel.
It does help.
The algorithm.
Yes, that's right. It does help the algorithm. I always forget about that. That's true. But more importantly, if you enjoy it, that's good. That's what we're here for. Hopefully, we triggered some thoughts. We're not here to give any answers, just thoughts, explore some of these topics, some of our concerns, some of our hopes, some of our dreams, and spark a conversation. And let's continue that conversation over at the village. And Peter, thank you so very much for joining us today. Looking forward to do this again.
Duncan. Yeah, absolutely. Next time Brad's off, conducting family business, I'll be there.
Excellent. All right. Thanks again, Peter, and take care, everybody.